see this, if the United States sees this, they're going to get in the war and they're going to fight the good fight. And some people say that that really works, that is one of the reasons that Wilson, who is a Gladstonian at heart, in fact, he has a picture of Gladstone on his mantle, is very much influenced by this story. Henry Morgenthau, who is the U.S. the ambassador to Constantinople during the genocide, is the most, probably the most outspoken American during this period. He sends evidence back. He is responsible, in fact, for getting Near East Relief off the ground, that relief organization off the ground. It's an organization at its first meeting that raises $100,000 from its first meeting, and this is in 1919 dollars. By the end of its a 15-year existence, it raised over the equivalent of what would be $1 billion in our terms. So this is not a small relief effort. So it prompts an incredible outpouring of monetary support as well as influence from the United States as well as from Britain. The story of it's also something. Armenian genocide also is the first atrocity event or first genocide. It's also the first atrocity story to be put on film. Auction of Souls is a film that's made in 1919, and it's about the genocide. It's about it's a silent film, obviously, in 1919, but it opens to great acclaim in the United States. In Britain, they censor it. They're worried about its effects on Muslim public opinion, and it becomes quite controversial during this period. And a lot of folks worry that this film is going to hurt the Britain at the peace table. But it's a Hollywood film. It, in fact, hasn't survived. I have a short excerpt of it that's been sort of rescued, and it's kind of an amazing story. But it was meant, really, to tell the story. This is an advertisement from the Times. Tell the story of the genocide from an eyewitness, and it's kind of an amazing story in and of itself. But these were sort of all people question it. They say, well, it's about making money. It's not a real document. But it is part of the story, I think, of telling the story of the genocide during this period. The war crimes trials that happen in the wake, I think, are really a result of this kind of pressure that happens in 1919. Not many people know about the Constantinople war crimes tribunals. In fact, Nuremberg is modeled in a lot of ways on this. I mean, I hate to call it a dress rehearsal, but these war crimes tribunals are the first time that international group. An international body attempts to try another nation for war crimes, and these war crime tribunals they attempt to prosecute Turkish officials for what is called crimes against humanity. They are a failure. They are an abysmal failure. In fact, Britain leads them, but they rely on the Ottoman government to round up their own officials, their own criminals. They say, you go out there and you get them, right? You put them in your jails. They're busy prosecuting Germany for what they consider war crimes on the Western Front. That distracts them. And finally, what happens at these war crimes, they're a failure because by the end of the war, Turkey has a lot of British prisoners. And since the British are the ones who are in charge of the prosecution, Winston Churchill says, let's make a deal. We'll let the war criminals go because eventually the British get custody of these Turkish war criminals. We'll let the war criminals go if you give us our soldiers back. And they do this population exchange, or not population exchange, I'm sorry, this prisoner exchange that essentially makes the war crimes tribunals really a dead letter. You can't, once they're gone, they're not going to come back. And it becomes a real failure, these war crimes tribunals. Gary Bass has written a lot about this. Is this the end of human rights? Well, no, it's not. But at this moment, it really does seem like international justice really fails. It's the first attempt to prosecute crimes against humanity, and the West just is unable to make good on these promises. It's sort of the Treaty of Berlin failure. What it does do is it establishes war crimes as a punishable offense, and I think that's pretty important. It really does say, look, there are things that are done in war that should not be done in war, genocide being one of them, right? It also, this event, the genocide itself, also puts a spotlight on relief efforts, what they can do and what they can't do. How do we assess Near East relief? Well, it sure saved a lot of people's lives. It sure made it possible that the genocide was not successful in exterminating a whole population. In fact, it got rid of the population in Turkey, but the Armenian diaspora continues to thrive in Western Europe, in South America, and particularly in the United States. So in that way, so the relief efforts are really understood as something that do good, if you will. And the diaspora, it really creates a real diaspora for immigration. I posed at the beginning of this lecture this notion of first and forgotten. How do we understand this place? This is first and forgotten. How did this come about? Well, first, it is widely recognized at the time as genocide. It's not just contemporary folks in the diaspora community and human rights community saying that was genocide. At the time, folks like Toynbee and Bryce understood it as genocide, and it was widely recognized even by folks like Winston Churchill. It fits the UN definition of genocide, so I think it's fair to say this was a first genocide. Forgotten? Why is it forgotten then? Well, first things sometimes are forgotten, but I think it really is about the failure of the war crimes trials. That prisoner exchange really shows how political expediency really gets in the way of things. The last thing I'd just like to end with remembrance. There is this famous quote by Hitler. Hitler has said when he's planning the extermination, it said that Hitler claims when he's planning the extermination of the Jews, who remembers the Armenians, right? So I can do whatever I want, who remembers them? It turns out a lot of people do remember. And these memorials to the genocide exist in different forms throughout the world. There are 28 Armenian genocide memorials in the United States, official and unofficial. Some are trees. There's an apricot tree planted in Ealing Broadway in London. Some are khachkars, which are these crosses. Some are pretty dramatic, like that's in Montebello, California, and there's the Armenian Genocide Museum in D.C. This one, of course, is the genocide memorial in Armenia itself. I put this middle picture here. This is a defaced genocide memorial in Budapest. And I think it's important for us to understand that this controversy and this idea of first and forgotten is a very live issue. And it really does matter how we both understand it and how we memorialize it. It's not just about remembrance, but it's about a piece of history. And whether we like it or not, the Armenian genocide is part of our collective memory as Americans, and I would say in the West more broadly. Thanks for listening.